everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is the wonderful time of year where the BookTube Prize begins, and I am going to go through the strategies that I've been using for the voting process, and also just talk you through my plans for BookTube Prize for 2022. So there are 3 categories in the BookTube Prize. In case you're not familiar, there's 3 different voting categories for the BookTube Prize this year in 2022, and they are all based on books that were published in the United States in the year before. So in 2021, the books that were published in nonfiction, fiction, and translated fiction. And when Robert announced that he was adding translated fiction, I was very intrigued by that category. And I think that for me, it was easily the section that appealed to me the most. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first year I entered the BookTube Prize, judging, I did a combination of fiction and nonfiction. So I did all 4 rounds, and in each round I did one or the other. In the end, I ended up reading 23 different books. So while that was great and it really increased my volume of reading, it was also a lot of pressure, and I never really got to benefit from, I think in only one case, I got to benefit from getting a book twice in a section so that I didn't have to reread new books every time. So that was a bit of a taxing thing for me. And I also found that reading nonfiction for me in a judging category was a challenge. I love reading nonfiction. I read some fantastic books, but when I didn't like a book, and it was nonfiction, it was very hard for me to get through it. And so it kind of discouraged me from wanting to read the nonfiction category again, because I just was worried that I was going to be inevitably get a book that I really didn't like and have to force myself through it. And it didn't feel fair to the rest of the judges to have that kind of foreboding feeling before I even started. So last year I only judged fiction, and I only judged 1 round. And you are able to, say at the beginning of each round whether or not you want to be put into the judge pool or not. So I did put my name in for the first round, but I wasn't selected for fiction in year 2. And then I ended up reading in the second round, and then the following rounds were just too busy for me. I just had too much going on to be able to read for the BookTube Prize judging. So when Robert announced that there was going to be a translated fiction category, I got very excited because I don't read a ton of translated fiction. And that's not necessarily because I don't seek it out. I do read some, and I have read some, but it's not a category of books that are widely talked about on BookTube or in general out there in the world. You might have a few books that sneak past and become widely acclaimed that are translated. Maybe they're made into a film or something like that. But in general, when you're listening to the book hype, I find that you don't actually hear a lot about translated fiction. And I know there is Women in Translation, which is a reading initiative that happens in August usually by a few BookTube people to try to elevate female authors who are translated, and I have participated in that a few times. But I think that for me, the idea of being forced to seek out a list of books. In this case, there's 64 books, I believe, on this list that Robert sent us, and go through them and, read the synopses and learn about the translators and all those types of things was really intriguing and really motivated me to participate this year in BookTube Prize. So I've gone through my list. Robert sends a Google Doc. So I just printed out the Google Doc so that I could go through my library's online catalog to do my categorization. So I talked about my categorization in my last BookTube Prize video last year, but I just wanted to go through it again in case you're new. I put marks beside each book. If it has a check, that means that I am interested in reading it. If it has an X, it means I'm not. And if it has a 0, it's a maybe. I also go through my library list and I see if they have it in their collection and in what format. So most of the books they had in book and ebook format. There are a few on here, I think not very many, maybe 2 or 3 that are also available in audio. And I also added a new category this year, which is the amount of pages in the book. So one of the things that I found challenging last year when reading the fiction category was reading The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, which was, I believe, almost 900 pages. It was a very tight squeeze. I just finished that book in time before I had to vote. And that was probably a little bit of my own failure to plan properly, but whenever I'm planning my TBRs, I read approximately 5 to 6 books a month. And you do get 2 months to complete these books, but it's good to know the length of the books beforehand. And I just never thought to write that out for myself and also use it as a criteria for the actual selection process. So I get to vote for 20 of the titles out of the 64, and there will be a list of 48 that are compiled from those votes. And I wanted to take into consideration if any of these books were really long, because to me, especially when you're reading a book, for instance, if I had put an X beside the book's title, so I knew I was not interested in reading it, and then it was also a 500-page book, for instance, this one here, I automatically put an X. I don't want to vote for this book. Not because necessarily I don't want to read it, because this one, for example, The Slaughterman's Daughter by Yaniv Iskovitz does sound very interesting, but I don't want to encourage a really long book right now because it's just not the right atmosphere for me to read a long book. If I'm going to read a really long book, I'd prefer not to be judging it. I also think in times, to take a book like that, which is obviously some sort of a family saga, and compare it to a more, a shorter book that's like 150 pages, it feels like comparing apples to oranges a little bit. And so that was another reason why that one got an X for me. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have to read it. I may still have to read it, because this voting process is not just about what I want to read, but what all the other judges for translated fiction want to read. And so it's highly possible that I will have to read that book, but at least I've written out the page count, written out the fact that I had put it as a no, and then I can kind of, plan the rest of my TBR for that month where I may have to read that book around it, knowing, this book will probably take me a really long time. I should maybe only get, 4 other books from for my TBR for that month, and then I should start it at this time or whatever I need to do. It's just another layer of helping me plan. So the little stats of this, as I went through it, read all the synopses of these books. I didn't read reviews. I don't tend to read reviews of books before I read them myself. That's not a criteria that I use when deciding if I'm going to read a book. Because other people's opinions are just other people's opinions, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to hate a book that some other reviewer hated it. So I don't tend to listen very closely. There is one book on the list that I had heard of before, Catch the Rabbit, which I know that Sean the Book Maniac read sometime last year and did not like. So I knew that, you know, I've heard of it. It's one of the books that have come through BookTube Prize, or sorry, through BookTube that I had heard. I also know about Jhumpa Lahiri. There's also Simone de Beauvoir on here, which is another really interesting thing happening on this list that I don't think is happening on any other list, is that some of these books were not written recently. They are not new fiction, they are newly published. And so you're getting authors, Simone de Beauvoir, who is long dead, who had a book that was newly translated and published in the United States in 2021. And I think that is fantastic, because you're getting this ability to read some really, you know, some literature from decades ago, but it's featured in this prize. So I think that's really intriguing and interesting to be able to compare and contrast. And while it may also be comparing apples to oranges, I think that it just adds a layer to this category that I'm going to find really interesting to read. So out of the 64 books, I had 19 that I automatically gave a check mark to that I did want to read, 23 that I said no to, and 22 that were maybes. So that just will help me when the final list is put out, and I will be able to go through these, highlight the ones that have been selected, find out which books I'm going to be reading in the first round. And then I can kind of gauge, you know, oh, I see, you know, out of the 23 that I didn't like, you know, that's most of the list, or which is actually what happened to me last year in fiction, I believe. The books that I chose were underwhelmingly represented on the list based on other books that I did not want to read. And so I think for me as well, that's why I'm really happy about doing the translated fiction category, because there's less hype around these books, and the people who vote for them who are living internationally may have heard hype about these books in their own countries, and so it'll have a really different effect, I think, on the list than the fiction list from last year, where, you know, the books with the most hype were, you know, the ones that got in. And in a lot of cases, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases. And I find hype around books to be quite misleading and difficult to get around, because there's all these great books that sound amazing, but nobody wants to read them because they want to read the ones they've already heard of. So we'll see. That is my thoughts so far on the beginning of the BookTube Prize. And as usual, I will be vlogging the experience of reading each book as I'm doing it, which obviously will not come out until I'm permitted to talk about how I feel about the books. And then with each round, I'll also do a ranking video where I talk about why I put the books where I did in the categories. So I hope if you're participating in the BookTube Prize that you are excited and, you know, researching your lists and picking the ones that you like to vote for. And I will be back again soon with another BookTube Prize video. Thank you so much for watching.